Native Americans are indigenous to this land, yet they were never here at the same time as Europeans. So how did they get here? Well, it's a bit complicated. Hello and welcome. Today we explore the history of the indigenous people of North America. Today we are going to start our 3-episode arc on Native Americans by exploring their deep history long before European ships ever touched the Atlantic shores. The vast lands of what is now the United States teemed with life, culture, and history. From the icy tundras of Alaska to the sun-scorched deserts of the Southwest, indigenous peoples had cultivated civilizations, developed complex societies, and maintained spiritual and ecological harmony with the land for thousands of years. In order to talk about how indigenous peoples came to be in North America and what life was like for them before European contact, we need to talk about where they came from. But even asking this question reflects how geography influences how we think. After all, we assume these groups all came from somewhere else. And when we use the term "it came," we're implying movement across space. But the peoples we refer to as Native Americans have always been here. If we center our analysis on the importance of place, we might ask different questions like how did life change for the people who lived here when the physical landscape changed, or how did the people adapt to the changing environment? But because so much of the pre-contact period is shrouded in mystery, we know the most about the history of Native Americans by looking at where they may have come from. Current evidence suggests that the first humans arrived in North America over 15,000 years ago. And it's likely that they migrated across what is now the Bering Land Bridge, otherwise known as Beringia, connecting easternmost Siberia and Alaska. During the last ice age, sea levels were lower, so this land bridge was dry and people could walk across it. But as the climate warmed, glaciers melted and sea levels rose, submerging the land bridge and separating the two continents. This migration across the Bering Land Bridge is sometimes referred to as the pre-Clovis culture, named for the discovery of the Clovis culture at the Blackwater Draw site in New Mexico. The Clovis culture is associated with distinctive stone tools called fluted points, which archaeologists have found throughout North and South America. But archaeologists have since discovered evidence of pre-Clovis sites. For example, the pre-Clovis culture of Monte Verde in Chile dates back 14,500 years. That means people were living in South America before the Clovis culture existed. And recent studies suggest that people may have reached the Americas via coastal migration along the edges of the Pacific Ocean, sailing on rafts made of reeds or logs. Regardless of how they got here, over millennia, these early migrants spread across the continent, forming hundreds of distinct cultures, languages, and tribal nations. One of the earliest well-documented cultures was the Archaic period, which lasted from roughly 8,000 BCE to 1000 BCE. During this period, people adapted to diverse climates and geographies across the continent. And archaeological evidence shows that people developed seasonal camps and followed animal migrations to hunt. They also began fishing and gathering wild plants and grains. In fact, evidence of plant domestication in North America dates to about 16,000 years ago. But those plants like squash and sunflowers were likely gathered and used long before they were intentionally cultivated. By 1000 BCE, the Archaic period gave way to the Woodland period, which lasted until about 1000 CE. During this time, societies began to grow more complex, developing social hierarchies and constructing large earthen mounds. In the northeast woodlands, the Iroquois Confederacy formed a political alliance between 5, later 6 nations, creating one of the largest and longest-lasting political unions in North American history. The Confederacy established the Great Law of Peace, a system of governance that predates the U.S. Constitution and influenced its framers. Meanwhile, in the Great Lakes region, the Hopewell culture flourished with large settlements and sophisticated trade networks extending as far south as the Gulf of Mexico. Then starting around 800 CE, the Mississippian culture rose in the eastern U.S. centered around the Mississippi River. By 1000 CE, the Mississippian culture included large cities such as Cahokia, which at its peak around 1200 CE was home to tens of thousands of people. The city sprawled across 5 square miles and was defined by earthen mounds, including the largest in the contiguous United States, Monk's Mound, which rises 100 feet and covers 14 acres. While the Mississippian culture declined after 1600 CE, its legacy continued in the societies that succeeded it, including the Creek, Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw. Meanwhile, farther west in the arid climate of the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built elaborate stone dwellings into cliffs and developed advanced irrigation systems to water their crops. Further south, the Hohokam people thrived in the desert of what is now Arizona. They developed an extensive canal system to irrigate farms and sustained large populations in the Sonoran Desert. And in the Pacific Northwest, the Tlingit, Haida, and others organized their societies around the rich resources of the ocean, practicing totemic art and building large houses with intricately carved wooden columns. In what is now the state of Washington, the Chinook created large villages of plank houses, evidence of their sophisticated woodworking skills. Down the coast in Oregon, the Kalapuya people were among the first to extensively cultivate the fertile Willamette Valley, creating settled villages that would later become the heart of the U.S. city of Portland. On the Great Plains, the ancestors of the Lakota, Cheyenne, and Comanche originally lived more sedentary lives as farmers and buffalo hunters. But around 1000 CE, horses were introduced to the Western Hemisphere, probably from Spain, and this drastically changed their way of life. Instead of following the seasons to find food, they became nomadic buffalo hunters, preserving the meat through techniques like drying and smoking. When Europeans began arriving in North America in the 1500s, these societies were just a few of the hundreds that populated the continent. Each had its own language, culture, religion, and relationship with the land. At this point, it's important to define some terms. We generally categorize the peoples we're discussing as Native Americans or indigenous peoples, meaning they are the original inhabitants of a territory based on their ancestral presence prior to colonization. Colonization itself refers to the process by which a powerful country claims and settles in a territory and exerts authority over the people who live there. And colonialism describes the ways that this power is exercised and the impacts it has on the colonized people and place. And if you've watched our episode on urbanization, you may remember that early European explorers often built relationships with local leaders and adopted some aspects of native cultures. These partnerships weren't always equal or beneficial. For example, the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto formed alliances with several southeastern tribes in the 1540s. His party stayed with the chieftain of the Coosa tribe for a time and learned about agriculture from them. But they also enslaved several of the Coosa people and forced them to work for them. As we move into the next episode, we'll continue to explore how interactions between European colonizers and Native Americans played out across the continent and the devastating consequences that followed. Many maps and borders represent modern geopolitical divisions that have only recently been decided and imposed on the land. Many geographical place names also don't reflect the indigenous or aboriginal people's languages. So we at Crash Course want to acknowledge these people's traditional and ongoing relationship with that land and all the physical and human geographical elements of it. We encourage you to learn about the history of the place you call home through resources like Native Land CA and by engaging with your local indigenous and aboriginal nations through the websites and resources they provide. Thanks for watching this episode. If you like this type of content, subscribe and leave us a comment that you want to see in the next documentary.